Cheating spouses and infidelity cases can be arguably some of the more abundant cases for private investigators out there today. And there is a close crossover in how these cases are handled to workers' comp, slip and fall, and other injury-related surveillance cases. But should someone even consider hiring a private investigator if they suspect their spouse or significant other of cheating? Let's break these down into two categories and take a deeper look. The first category is infidelity or cheating by what we often refer to as someone's significant other or partner. So this would be an individual whom the client is not legally married to. But even given that they never were legally married, there may be legal considerations to keep in mind. Now, let me first state, I am not an attorney, nor do I play one on YouTube. This video, nor any of my videos, should be considered as legal advice, rather they are my own personal opinion based on my experiences. Okay, there is this thing we often hear about called common law marriage. A common law marriage is a legally recognized marriage between two individuals who have not gone through the formalities or legalities of marriage. But the individuals have had certain behaviors such as cohabitation, sharing of expenses and debt, and other considerations. Now this is very specific to the 8 or so states that I found that have common law marriage laws on the books. Those states are Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Montana, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Texas, and Utah. Each of those states has specific laws that outline what requirements there are for a common law marriage. So if you're in one of those states, you would need to reference those laws to decide if a common law marriage is in place. And if so, then it would be covered as a marriage in this video. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. Now for those other relationships with significant others involved, should someone hire a private investigator to determine whether infidelity is occurring? To answer this, you need to first answer another question. What will you gain by having this knowledge? If there are children involved, shared assets, or other shared financial resources or liabilities, then it may be of benefit from a legal standpoint to have evidence proving that infidelity is occurring. Now again, this is going to be state and case dependent. Many states count infidelity as a huge no-no in a marriage or other relationship. But on the flip side, many states do not weigh infidelity very heavy at all. Colorado is one of those states that does not put a lot of weight into infidelity matters, as it is a no-fault divorce state. So basically anyone can divorce anyone for whatever reason or for no reason. I would recommend that anyone who has questions about this regarding their case or their client's case to seek legal advice from a skilled attorney in your particular state. Many times, though, it is just a matter of needing to know. Many times we get calls and they just need to know. They need confirmation of whether it is or is not occurring. From my experience, as a general rule, but not in all cases to be sure, if the client thinks infidelity is occurring, it probably is occurring. But if the client wants us to find out, then we will by all means work our best to see what is happening. Now, if you're going to hire a PI to do this, make sure they have a great deal of experience in working infidelity and cheating spouse investigations. Most of the time, surveillance is the route to take in these investigations. And if the surveillance investigator is not skilled or is not familiar with the geographical area, it could lead to disaster. We go to great lengths in our domestic surveillance cases to not get burned or make the subject suspicious. Now, obviously, we cannot guarantee we will not get burned, not lose our subject, or make the subject suspicious, but we do our best to ensure a safe and productive investigation is conducted. One of the worst outcomes is to prove that nothing is happening, but then get burned on surveillance. It will not take the subject long to figure out who is having them surveilled, and that could hurt the relationship even more. Now, regarding cases where the couple are legally married, common law or through the normal marriage avenues, is there any gain in those cases for someone to hire a private investigator to see if infidelity is occurring? As stated before, in some states, like here in Colorado, the fact that infidelity is occurring may not have any outcome on the divorce itself. But it may have some influence on things such as child custody and splitting of assets and debts, things like that. Again, seek legal advice from a competent attorney as to how this may affect your case. I am not a legal expert, nor is this legal advice. From my experience, though, many times the court may consider the infidelity if certain things are occurring because of the infidelity. For instance, if the subject committing infidelity is racking up a great deal of expenses, hotel rooms, second homes, additional vehicles, things like that, then the court may consider that when splitting out the debts. As well, if the infidelity is occurring in the presence of children, or if children are being placed in unsafe conditions, things like that, it may affect child custody allocations. Identifying the other person and conducting a background can be of great benefit to the case as well. If the subject is seeing an ex-felon with a long rap sheet, that may help in child custody cases. Or if the cheating spouse is caught often using drugs, excessive alcohol abuse, or other dangerous activities during their escapades, it may be very helpful. Now, one thing to keep in mind, folks, any good PI will not, I repeat, will not provide identifying information of subjects involved in these matters which the client is not already privy to. I always suggest to work with the client's attorney directly if at all possible. This information can go to the attorney as confidential work product. Then, if the attorney needs to subpoena that person for testimony or have them questioned or whatever, they have the information. But if you, the investigator, find out that Bob, your client's husband, is having an affair with Jane Doe, and you tell your client who she is, where she lives, or other personal identifying information, you have now probably placed Jane Doe in danger. Not to mention, you have probably broken some laws regarding your private investigator's license, and even if your state does not have licensing, you are probably violating some other laws or regulations. The last thing I ever want to do is wake up in the morning, turn on the news, or grab the newspaper and find out that my client's spouse and the person they were involved with were killed the night before by my client. This has happened, folks. It happens more time than people believe. Maybe it does not always end up in a murder case, but many times it becomes assault, attempted murder, stalking, or other forms of criminal and violent behavior. Even in marriage cases, many times the client just needs to know, yes or no, is it happening or is it not happening? I have had cases, though, where the answer was simply no, it is not happening, and the client didn't believe it. Not that they questioned our investigation or the outcome of the investigation, rather they just took it as they didn't do anything this time. An example of a case was one we had a while back where the client was adamant that her husband was coming here with their kids on a mountain getaway trip and would most definitely be meeting up with his girlfriend. We had to work the case with multiple operatives as it consisted of a ton, and I mean a whole lot of foot surveillance and stationary foot surveillance on a ski resort up in the mountains. We also needed to cover it from early morning hours to late night hours, and to make things even more difficult, we didn't know where they were staying for sure, so we had to pick up a tail from one of those small mountain airports as they were flying in on a private jet. We worked that case for an entire week, folks. It was one of the most arduous and difficult cases I ever worked. We had so much video, you wouldn't believe it. They were heavily active all day, every day, always doing something. In the end, we pulled it off without a hitch. No one was ever suspicious of us, and we got many, many hours of video of our subject and his kids. We got video of him taking the kids to ski lessons. We got video of him spending time with each kid one-on-one. We got video of him dining out 3 meals a day with the kids and taking them for ice cream, sodas, and all kinds of other fun activities like hiking, shopping, you name it. We got tons of video of our subject being a pretty darn good parent the entire time, and he never once met up with anyone, acted flirty towards anyone, or displayed any suspicious activity. When it was all done, the client just said, well, you can't win them all. I guess he didn't do anything this time. Yep, folks, you can't win them all. There will be some cases you work where the client doesn't get the expected outcome. The first thing I would suggest for anyone looking to hire a PI is to make a list of the reasons that you need to hire a professional investigator. An example for your list for a case where you think your spouse is cheating might look something like this. He comes home late on certain nights. When he comes home on these nights, he seems distant and disinterested. He always says he was with friends or coworkers, but he never says their names. He gets texts late at night. He keeps his phone away from me. The kids say there is a lady who stops by sometimes when I'm at work. If you're a business person and you think your business partner may be embezzling money or running a competing business on the side, the list might look something like this. She suddenly has new expensive things like a new car and fancy jewelry. She meets with a lot of clients, but sells sales have drastically decreased. She comes into the office late most days and leaves early most days. Your list needs to have some details like these examples so you can give that to the prospective PI so they can thoroughly evaluate the case. You should also add to your list some ideas of what the investigation may be able to do to help you. For instance, in a cheating spouse or a child custody case, surveillance is often prudent, as well open source intelligence or OSINT investigations might be appropriate. For a business fraud case, surveillance may also be relevant, as well OSINT and a comprehensive background for all those involved. Now you need to find that perfect professional private investigator. The next step for you is to prepare yourself. You need to talk to 3 to 5 potential investigators. When talking to private investigators, keep in mind their primary goal is to close the sale. Your job, though, is not to find the PI the quickest, but to find the one that is the best fit for your needs. Finding the right one the first time is your highest priority. Now you need to sit down in a quiet place away from distractions and get on the internet and start your search. For most cases, I suggest you start with your state Private Investigators Association. One thing you need to keep in mind, there's no PI that truly does everything. Now you need to pick at least 5 PIs or firms to look at. Jot down their names, their investigative specialties that fit your needs, their phone numbers, and their websites. For each of these PIs, you should review their website and see if it is professional and speaks to handling your type of case. You also want to check with your state licensing authority and make sure they are licensed as required and their license is in good standing, and if they have any complaints that have been filed against them. You should also do an internet search for them to see if there are any news stories about them and look at online reviews. From your research, you should now be able to make a list from 1 to 5. If any of them just came across in your research as a definite no, then scratch them off your list now. You should now start calling the PIs, starting with number 1 and then go on down the list. If you have to leave a message, and many times you will have to leave a message as most PIs are working on other cases, make note of the time that you left the message. I would suggest your message be brief, but give enough detail so they have a good idea of your needs. Something like, "Hi, my name is John. I wanted to talk to you about conducting a fraud investigation for our company. We think we might have an issue with one of the managers that's stealing items or possibly money. Please call me at your earliest convenience." If you have not heard back from them in, say, 24 hours, I would suggest that they get scratched off your list as well. When you speak with the private investigators, you need to give them as much detail as you can without specifics like people's names, addresses, etc., so they can evaluate your particular situation. You should take note of the things and questions that the PIs ask you. Do they seem to be listening? Do they come up with potential solutions for your case, or do they just throw out some generic quote? If they reiterate things that you said, that's a good sign. It shows that they are listening and trying to ensure that they understand. If they just listen and when you're done talking, they just say, "We can start that investigation for X dollars," they may not be the best fit for you. Every case a PI takes should have its own investigative plan. Yes, there are a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of specifics for each case too. Too many times I see PIs that just give a starting price. "We can start that case for $1,000. What they often really mean is they will get that initial retainer fee, then build a case plan using that retainer fee just to cover their time building the plan, do a little snooping around, and then they keep coming back for more money time and time again. Your best bet is a professional investigator that can give you a good idea of what the entire investigation will cost and will entail, or at the very least what a starting point really looks like. For instance, a fraud case may be initiated with, let's say, a $2,500 retainer. That will include comprehensive backgrounds on the 2 individuals in question, 3 days of surveillance, report time, and other research. And after that, dependent on our findings, we may need to discuss further investigation as necessary. Make note of what they offer and don't make that decision on the fly. You want to discuss this with other potential PIs, and then you may need to go back for follow-up questions. One of the most important pieces of information you should get from them while interviewing them is what type of insurance do they have and what type of bond do they have? They need to have, I would say, $1 million or more of liability and errors and omissions insurance to cover any mishaps that might occur during the investigation, and a bond in the amount that covers your retainer. The bond really protects you, the consumer, if they run off with your retainer and never do any work. You can then go after that bond. You then should use all the information from each one of the PIs, formulate a list of follow-up questions, and call each one back and ask them those follow-up questions. Now you should have a good idea what each of them has to offer, and hopefully you can narrow it down to 2 to 3 PIs. Your final decision may be based on experience, price, gut feel, or even a combination of a lot of things that you've considered. If you have vetted them out well, you should be able to enter into an agreement with them with a fair amount of confidence. You have now decided on the PI to use. You should enter into a contract with them. If they do not offer contracts, I would be very leery about doing business with them. This is standard practice for most legal businesses. In fact, licensing requirements for PIs in most states require a contract. You should also ask to get a copy of their insurance certificate, not the entire policy, the certificate, and their bond along with the contract. Go over the contract in depth and write down notes and questions. If needed, have an attorney or an accountant go over it with you, or at least a friend who understands a little bit about legalese. You may not have the ability to make changes to the contract, but you can always ask for changes, and you need to know the details of the contract well before signing it. Once signed, make sure you get a signed contract from them as well. You should expect to see things in the contract like the hourly rates, how your money is going to be spent, summary details of the investigation, reporting expectations, cancellation clause. If you want to cancel, you want to be able to get out of it, and other legal matters. During the investigation, you should be able to get progress updates as well, so you want to discuss this with the PI. After the investigation, you should get a report of findings along with video, photo, or other evidence that's gathered within a reasonable time frame, I would say 48 hours. You should discuss this with the private investigator so you know what to expect. You need to keep in mind your professional private investigator is a finder of the fact. They cannot make things happen throughout the course of their investigation. What they do is they investigate the matter at hand, they report the findings as well. They cannot guarantee results of the investigation other than they will work diligently and report what they have discovered. The topic is really answering the questions of consumers, the person hiring the private investigator, but it is also important for the professional private investigator to know what the customer is thinking about and what processes they may go through while looking to hire a PI. Regardless of why you need to hire a private investigator, be it to track a person down, keep an eye on someone's activity, or just to get more information about someone, you may think that hiring a private investigator is easy. However, with so many choices out there, hiring the right private investigator oftentimes seems like a daunting task, to be sure. So the first piece of advice I have for you as you start looking to hire a PI is to make sure you do your research beforehand and be prepared with the right questions to ask the PI. You want to make sure whoever you hire, it is someone you are comfortable talking to and they can get you the results, the evidence, or the information you need. Most people do not know this, but most states require PIs to be licensed. So when talking to PIs, ask them to see their license or other credentials before you hire them. If they are reluctant to provide you with that information, then you may need to continue your search with them no longer on the list. And even for states that don't have PI licensing, which there are only a handful of them now, I would still recommend you ask the PIs you talk to if they are licensed, what jurisdictions they are licensed in, and get a copy of that license. For instance, here in Colorado, we no longer have PI licensing. However, some of us are licensed in neighboring states. Now, what about meeting with investigators in person? Well, in today's day and age, I have found that we do not meet as often with our clients as we used to back in the day. When I first got started in this business, I always met with my clients in person if possible. But today, well, everything is quite rush, and everyone expects to do things remotely, so you may or may not meet with them in person depending on their policies. But you can always ask to meet with them at their office or at your home or someplace else, or even do a virtual meeting online with them. Before you hire the PI, you need to decide exactly what you want them to do for you. Now, don't be afraid. I know you probably don't know exactly what you need them to do. That is why you need to discuss the case in detail with them prior to hiring them. You need to tell them everything about the case, all of your fears, all of your concerns, what has happened that led up to the situation you are in. Give them all of the details. I know this can seem a bit scary, but the more the PI knows, the more they can develop a plan for you. If the private investigator just asks you, what do you want me to do? Well, they may not be the right one for you. A good PI will be able to formulate a plan of action for the investigation they will conduct on your behalf. Keep this in mind too. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot ask the private investigator to do anything illegal. So don't ask them to tap a phone. Don't ask them to call your ex in the middle of the night to see what they are doing. Don't ask them to trespass to get evidence. And if they say they can't do something because it is illegal, well, they may have just saved you a ton of headaches. I know of many cases where the investigator didn't choose well with these types of requests, and it not only negatively affected the PI, it also cost the client plenty too. In fact, I know some cases where the PI and the client were arrested because of illegal investigative tactics. When the PI does tell you what they can do, make sure you take good notes and ask, what does that do for my case? How will this investigation benefit me in my situation? You see, most PIs specialize in 1, 2, or maybe 3 areas of investigation. If the PI specializes in locating people, but you need surveillance to prove your ex is drinking with the kids, they may not be the best fit for your case. They may offer to help, they may go out and try to do a good job, but if they are not experts at not only conducting surveillance, but knowing the ins and the outs, the do's and the don'ts of following someone, it could be very detrimental to your situation. Now, how do you find these PIs in the first place? Well, the phone book is probably not a good place to start anymore. I always suggest to start with a good Google search. But remember, when searching on the internet, it is kind of like shopping in a candy store. Everything that is presented to you is presented in a way to entice you to take action. So do not, I repeat, do not just search for a PI, then call the first 3 that pop up. You need to do your homework first. Make a list of what outcome you're hoping for, and then start looking at websites for the PIs and their firms. Now, when you search, try things like Private Investigator near me, or Private Investigator in the town you need a PI in, things like that. Google is very good at matching you in close proximity with businesses close to you. But if you need a PI to work a case 1,000 miles away from you, then you don't want a PI down the street. I also always tell people to check with friends and family to see if they know anyone they trust in the PI field. You would be surprised how well this works. Even if they don't know a PI, they may know a process server, an attorney, or a paralegal that knows a good PI. Word of mouth recommendations are often far more valuable of a resource than what Google or other search engines can provide. Now that you have a list of 3 or 4 PIs, take a look and see what you can learn from their websites. They should have a list of experiences and skills, as well types of investigations they conduct. While you're checking them out, look at their Google referrals too. This is highly important these days. Anyone can put text up on their website that looks like real customer referrals. But when they have several good Google reviews, well, that speaks loudly. It is always good to check references if possible. However, in the legal world, this oftentimes just isn't practical. I can't just give out my clients' names and phone numbers. And to be honest, if I asked, most of my clients would say no due to the confidential nature of the business. That is also why online reviews are so important. Here's another ask of the PI as you are vetting them in your decision-making process. Make sure they have insurance and a bond in place, and make sure you get a copy of each when you hire them. If they are licensed, they probably are required to carry a bond. The bond is for your protection. So if they run off with your retainer, you can go after the bond, and the bond company will go after them. Insurance is a must as well. So if anything goes wrong during the investigation, their insurance company steps in, and hopefully it shields and protects you from liability. Watch for warning signs before hiring the PI too. Make sure they spell out exactly what they will do and exactly what it will cost. So many PIs just give an hourly fee and get a small retainer up front, and they never really say what they will be doing. Then they have spent the retainer and sent an invoice for more to continue efforts. And this cycle goes on and on and on with no results. We often refer to this as nickel and diming the client. A good PI will have a full retainer they will request that should get most, if not all, of the job done. Now, the more complicated the job, like criminal defense cases, this may not be the case, but for the average job it is. Your PI also should have a contract, and in that contract it should spell out the fees, what will be done, how to cancel the investigation, and all the other legal jargon. And the contract should be fair to both parties. Do keep in mind, though, most PI contracts will have clauses regarding client interference, early cancellation, and other things to consider that do protect the PI from bad clients as well. If you want to see what a good PI contract would have in it, you might check out my book, Contracts for Private Investigators, Secrets No One Else Will Tell You. I go in great detail in this book what should be included in a PI contract to ensure it is fair and detailed for both parties. Take note of how the PI interfaces with you too. Do they respond to emails timely? Do they discuss openly about their investigation abilities, or do they beat around the bush? Remember, you will be entrusting them with some of the most sensitive data of your life. You need to have someone you can trust. Once you have hired the PI, once you have a solid contract in place, make sure you provide as much relevant information as possible to the PI so they can do the job requested. If you are hiring them to do surveillance, then provide photos, vehicle descriptions, lists of subjects, likes and habits, and other things to help them out. Be patient as well as the PI works your case as they go through the investigation. If they are doing surveillance, you need to make sure they have ample time to do the work, then ample time to evaluate the evidence gathered, create a report, edit video, and gather photos. Too many times the client wants a PI out right now, tonight, and a report back by midnight. And to be honest, folks, that all spells disaster in my book. Rushed cases seldom work out well, and high-pressure clients usually garner low-quality investigators. Now, what can you expect after the investigation is complete? You should get, and this should be covered in the contract too, a report after a reasonable time. Usually this is going to be within 24 or 48 hours of completion of the work. The report should also be accompanied by any other work products such as surveillance videos, scene photos, supporting reports, and other evidentiary items pertinent to the investigation.